we probably should get started. So, hi everyone, good morning or good evening in your case, wherever you are located. Here you can find the webinar rules. Please go through them, and if you have any questions, address those to the reuse company. So today we'll be talking about knowledge management process and particularly patterns. So what are patterns and how can they improve your projects, your system engineering projects? But about myself, I'm Katrina. So here you have my contact details in case you would like to ask any questions afterwards. And let's start. First, we have to discuss what the patterns are actually and why should we use them. Then we'll start using them from the very beginning, what you can do and what are the available options. And then we'll have a quick round of Q&A. So what are the patterns actually and how can they improve your project? So patterns in a nutshell are the requirement structures, because the goal is to structure the information, the knowledge that you use, and to make it reusable. So these are the structures that are repeated, kind of repeated semantic structures that you may find in your requirements. Of course, we talk about formal representation because each movable slot of the knowledge that you manage is definitely formal because there are some restrictions. And the goal is actually to manage not just information, but knowledge. If you've been able to attend our previous webinar 2 weeks ago about the ontology, so how to convert your information into knowledge, you may already know that the goal is to create links and connections between your data within your requirements. So if you move one step further, you will be able to construct these semantic structures. And this is the example that I've been showing you in the previous webinar of this series. So what we've tackled so far was to discuss the vocabulary. That there are two types of vocabulary, domain-specific and generic English. So generic English, it's any type of words applicable to any domain. And something more specific to a concrete project, it's domain-specific vocabulary. And then what we did at the previous webinar is to construct kind of conceptual models, or better say hierarchies in our case. So for example, we know that temperature warrior, that's the name of our model system. It belongs to the cluster system because our database recognizes it as a system. We have such an acceptable range of the weight of the system. In this case, it's between 35 and 35.2 kilos. And for example, temperature warrior also has two subsystems, such as control and power one. And of course, we also have generic conceptual models, so generic hierarchies. We know, for example, that the physical characteristics, one of those can be weight or length, for example. So what we'll try to do today is to convert the following requirement. The minimum weight of the temperature warrior shall be 35 kilos into patterns. So how to actually structure this information and being able to repeat the structure afterwards. But for this, we need to know why to use patterns and what benefits can they bring us. So the first thing is actually to convert the plain text into structures and establish the relationships. It's not just about writing any sort of text. It's about putting certain restrictions and conceptualizing the relationships within them. Secondly, as the name of our company suggests, it's about reusing. So you actually should try to reuse the effort that you invert in your project and maybe being able to optimize it afterwards in the similar projects with some similar requirements or simply similar semantic structures. The third reason is to actually be able to improve the requirements writing process, because both the authors and the users need to be consistent with the information that they receive and perceive. So by using patterns, you are able to establish the guidelines of how to write your requirements and also notify the users and the authors of the wrong usage of certain concepts, semantic structures, words, etc. The fourth reason is to customize. And it's crucial that any sort of patterns can be easily customizable for any domain, because what you do is you create a structure and this is modifiable. But the vocabulary may be shared across different projects, meaning that you can create a pattern and with a small change, it can be applicable to very different projects just because you change the restrictions in a particular slot. I'll show you this more into practice in the demo part. And the fifth reason is to be able to extend your knowledge. So patterns, being semantic structures, are also present in some of the libraries that we provide you, like EARS and sophist ones. You could find those on our webpage, but in a nutshell, if you would like to follow some of the guidelines already created, we provide you with basically an installation pack as easy as logging into KM Knowledge Manager, importing it, and being able to use the patterns already created according to some of the guidelines provided by this instructions. So if we try to break down this requirement, that's what we're going to get. So the, in this case, it's the article. Minimum, we leave this word as minimum, as it is, because our goal is to create the minimum weight pattern. Then from the previous layer, we know that weight is a physical characteristic. So as long as the patterns need to be reusable, we need to generalize and not just plug in the very same word. Then the preposition of, the article, recognizing the system, and of course, finalizing with the number and measurement unit, because it doesn't have to be just 35 in kilos. It needs to be any number and any measurement unit related to the weight. So this is a conceptual framework, but let's see how this actually works into practice. I'm going to show you a quick demo, and I will be pausing to give you more explanations. So have a look here. What we do is just, this is patterns mainly, all the patterns that you can get when you install out of the box database. So of course, it will not be blank for you to be able to start off with something. Now we'll be creating a new pattern and inserting the text that we had, and breaking it down into smaller chunks. So first, inserting a name maybe. In our case, it's going to be the minimum weight pattern. Sorry for the technical issues. It seems like the video continues stopping. Let's try again here. Okay, so we insert a name, as I told you before, and then we just try to modify these chunks to actually fit into more generic structures. So the first one, the definite article, seems fine. Then we have the minimum. So minimum as a word belongs to the cluster of ranges, and that satisfies our requirement. Then we can see that over here, noun plus noun, weight of the temperature area. This is a pattern already created in our system when we want to identify two nouns together. But in our case, this is not what we expect. We don't expect any noun and any noun together. So what we can do is actually to break it down into smaller levels. As you can see here, there are, in this case, the system offers us 2 levels, and we want to go 1 level deeper. So to actually break it down, now you can see that we have the requirements of using the specific words, weight of the temperature area, but that's not what we expect. So of, for example, in our case, belongs to the term tag of preposition of. So let's generalize a bit more. In terms of definite article, we also try to establish there to match them, to use both definite articles. Here, as I explained you before, in this case, we specifically want to measure the minimum weight, not maybe maximum, that could also belong to the same cluster. And as I told you, it's not just about the weight, it's about any property and physical characteristic. So we may be measuring the minimum weight, the minimum length, the minimum height, whatever belongs to this cluster of property and physical characteristics. So afterwards, actually here inside you could see all the possible physical characteristics included. Temperature area belongs to the cluster system, because this is the system recognized by our database. This is our use case. So let's try to generalize, and this way any sort of system will be fit into this pattern. Afterwards, we have the modal verb, then we have the action to be, and you see that also another pattern is recognized, but we break it down because we want to detect separately the measurement units, as I'm doing here with the term tag, and actually to be able to detect not any generic number, but also not just the generic number as a phrase, but any generic number. Here in advanced options, what I'm showing you is that it's not just about establishing the restrictions on the slot. You can also give some sort of freedom for them. So the first option is opposite restriction. If you say that you expect here a cluster system and mark this option, so anything but the words from the cluster system will be accepted. The second option is the optional one. So if you choose any slot as optional, it means that it doesn't have to be there, and still the pattern will be matched. And the wildcard, it's more about letting you insert anything in your pattern until the next slot is met. So here, for example, we established a definite article. The is optional because maybe some of the system going afterwards will not actually need it, and we still want it to fit into the button. So let's check if everything is all right. Yeah, the only thing missing is this. We want to expect any number, not just explicitly saying generic number. And we're done. This is our button. We can check it again. So everything works. And yeah, we can also open it like this and see the structure. And now let's try to test. So we insert the phrase with which we've just created, and of course it's going to be recognizing it because that's the phrase that was used as an example to split it into removable chunks. And yeah, if we also break it down here, we see all the slots identified and formally represented, as well as checking, for example, the log. So what you can see here, temperature warrior, is the name of our system, but also we have words such as temperature and warrior separately in our database. And so the system suggests us as the first candidate to use temperature warrior because it's a full noun and because it belongs to the cluster system. That's the incentive that helps the system to prioritize what sort of candidate should go first into identifying the terms. So yeah, checking that everything was identified as it was. And actually, let's try to go to this cluster system that I've shown you, that I've talked to you a lot around. And you'll see that different words belong to this cluster, such as element, engine, and temperature warrior too. So by establishing that cluster restriction and that slot, any sort of word that matches this this cluster will be accepted into the button. Now I change this to the engine, and you see that the button is detected again because we just matched the requirements. And if we take the definite article the that was optional off again, you'll see that it's also identified because it was established as optional. So it's really about how would you like to move your chunks and put restrictions on them. And when we create a button, so what we can do with that. Now I've opened the window of RQA, Quality Studio. That's the tool that we use to assess the quality of your requirements. And let's check some of the possible metrics that may help you to put more into practice the usage of the buttons. So for example, one is to avoid the use of passive voice out of the condition block. So what do we want to say here is that we penalize the use of passive voice unless it's in the condition. But yeah, checking more, for example, the computation. So here we use two different buttons, and we say that if the passive voice is detected, so bad quality, but we don't want to calculate the quality in the condition. But how do we explain to the system what is passive voice and what is condition and how to actually do this? So for this, we go back to KM and we just search for the button that we've created about passive voice. And here we go. We open the passive voice detector that button created, and that's the structure. So in order to identify a passive voice, it requires a verb to be, then optional adverb, and then the verb itself. And as long as the semantic structure is met, the metric will be automatically assessing. Another possible example for you would be to see, for example, the use of inadequate structures. So patterns are not just about incentivizing what to use, because you're not able to, let's say, to measure the quality of an advice, but you can measure the quality of an error. So for this, we can create a metric that penalizes the use of anti-patterns or inadequate structures. And if we go to this pattern group that contains several patterns inside, you can see that our database identifies 3 that we definitely would not like to see used in our system engineering project. And one of those is, for example, this one. So we penalize the usage of either there or it shall be because there is no actor. So we would like any sort of requirements that we use to have a specific actor during the action, not just about some neutral words as it and there. So this was the short demo for demonstrating how the patterns work. And now it's time for Q&A. So feel free to address any questions to the Reuse company. And whilst you may be writing, I'll present you the next webinar that we'll be having in March. And it's going to be about applying the PBOK guide to verify the quality of your requirements. and how to make them professional. So this webinar will be 1 hour long. It's not just an express webinar, so save the date. And it's going to be taking place on March 8th at 5 p.m. Set time, and on March 10th at 9 a.m. set time. So that wherever you are located, you'll be able to attend. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much. This is again my contact detail in case you would like to address some particular questions after the webinar, or you're too shy to ask them now. And if you're not, let's hang out for a bit more and see whether you have some questions. Okay. It looks like the buttons can be created and or adjusted along the way, or while a team captures the requirements, what is great. But I have 2 questions. How many buttons the tool comes with to start from? So about this, we have out-of-the-box database. It contains all the generic English without domain-specific words, and it also contains the buttons. The buttons such as passive voice, for example, action and subject and action. So exact number, but I would say like around 30 more or less. So it's all the basic structures that you may use with the requirements. But again, it's for you to get the inspiration, and they can be adjusted. But even starting with the basic out-of-the-box buttons, you can already write pretty good requirements. Second, how many buttons are expected that a typical system requirements module should have? Well, it really depends to your approach and how general or how specific would you like your buttons to be. So if we talk about, like as I showed you with the cluster system, for example, if your project uses 10 systems, so this will be applied the minimum weight measurement to all the 10 systems. But if you want to divide your 10 systems into 3 subgroups, so you'll have to also reflect this in the button. But I mean, there is no any specific number. It's mainly about how complex your project and your requirements module is. But I have to say that it's not about the quantity of the requirements and the buttons that reflect them. It's mainly about how much do you need. So don't try to overcomplicate. But generally speaking, maybe some really complex products and projects with maybe, I don't know, car manufacturing would be, 50, but it's again, if it's a very, very regulated process of writing your requirements. And also bear in mind that when you write your requirements, it's about, when you write your buttons within your requirements, it's about reusing the semantic structures. So if all your requirements follow the similar structure, you will not need more than just a few buttons and sub-buttons that reflect this. But if the information within your requirements, the semantic structures are very different, so you will need maybe more to reflect on it. I'm not sure if I have covered it all, but if any other questions, reach out to me, or or you can ask something now. Cecilia, do we have any questions addressed to you?
No, I don't have any questions either.
So let's wait for a bit more unless someone is thinking through. What type of requirements do you cover? Any classification? So in the particular example that I've shown you, we've been using system requirements, but it's not about the type. So the buttons are there to optimize your writing process and to make it as reusable as possible. So any type of requirements. Again, the buttons, so for example, the ones that we've created, I've shown you, we penalize the use of there shall be structure. But if you consider that for your particular button, for your particular requirement, this is fine, you just say that it's fine. It's not about following certain rules. It's just a tool that enables you to create the rules, sort of. Any specific domain. So as I've shown you, we've been using, for example, cluster system. So it was limiting any sort of words belonging to that cluster, but not any specific domain. I mean, it depends also on the vocabulary that you use. So of course, if you want to talk about aircrafts, first you need to plug in the aircraft vocabulary. Yeah, e-patents, yeah, exactly, domain free, exactly. Okay, any other questions from anyone's side? Yeah, exactly. As Jose is saying, the most important part is to customize. So it's up to you. What type of information do you expect to be plugged in and managed and reused? And if you want to fix any particular slot and say, okay, here expect only this domain-specific word because that's my requirement, fine by you. All right. So it seems like we don't get many other questions, but if there is none, again, don't hesitate to reach me out afterwards, and I'll try to cover the topics that you're worrying about. Yeah, as Jose is saying, you may, if you're interested in the ontology, address to the previous webinar that I've done 2 weeks ago. It was about actually managing the domain-specific vocabulary. So how to make these generic structures non-generic, how to make them applicable to your requirements and to the future use of your patterns. Exactly. Nice. So if there is no other concerns, see you at the next webinar, and I hope you have a great day.